Hey there! Today we are cooking with mushrooms, bread, thyme, aromatic vegetables, stock, and milk. On this episode of What Do You Make of This? We're cooking mushroom soup. Mushroom soup is one of those foods that, if I see it on a restaurant menu, I will always order it. It's so hearty, it's so interestingly delicate, and one of the beautiful things about making mushroom soup at home is it doesn't require a lot of work. It doesn't take a lot of ingredients. It's just about taking things that are very common, very easy to find, but really elevating them to a different level. One of the things that I'm going to be doing today for this mushroom soup is actually thickening it with bread instead of roux. And what I like to do for this soup is to actually use a bread bowl when I can find it, because it just gives it that really nice restaurant feel. If you can't find a bread bowl, however, you can absolutely just use any kind of white bread that you like. It's not a problem. But for the sake of this episode, I thought we'd keep things fancy. So to hollow out a bread bowl, I like to use a serrated paring knife. If you don't have one of these, a steak knife also works very well because it's just going to really help to grip the bread. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go slightly in. I'm not going to cut it exactly in half. I'm going to go probably about 3/4 up the bread, and I'm just going to slice at a slight angle all the way around the bread, like so. Try to do it so you can see what I'm doing. Normally I would turn the bread while I'm doing this. And I'm just going to go in a complete circle all the way around and slowly try to work that knife under so that I can pop off the top. So what I'm gonna do is just give it a little bit of a press to flatten it down just a little bit. I don't wanna smash it, but I do wanna flatten it because what we're going to do is turn this little top into a piece of garlic bread. I'm gonna just use that as a little stand. So to do that, I'm just going to take some butter. You can also use olive oil for this, and it's very nice. And I'm just going to scrape the butter as bestly as I can all over the top of the bread. Bestly is not a word, I just heard myself say it. It is now. Just get that all over the top of the bread, like so. And then all I'm going to do is pop that into an oven. So I'm going to use a toaster oven, but you can absolutely use a conventional oven for this. 350 degrees for about 5 minutes. We're just looking for it to get kind of golden brown and the butter will melt into the bread. I know right now it's just buttered bread, but I will show you how to turn it into garlic bread as soon as it's ready. There we go. Okay, so this still is not a bowl yet, is it? So what we're going to do is reach in and just start scooping out the center of the bread. Now, you do want to be careful when you do this. You want to leave a little bit of the excess bread along the edges. If you get too close to the crust, it's actually going to crack when you put the soup in it, and then it leaks everywhere. I've done it. It's a mess. It's a delicious mess, but it is a mess. So try to leave yourself as much space as possible while still getting a pretty generous handful of bread out of the middle. So if you are not using a bread bowl for this recipe and are instead opting to just use whatever kind of white bread you like, we're going to be looking for about 1.5 cups of bread that has been torn into tiny pieces. I'm actually going to tear it over the pot of soup a little bit later, and I will show you how to do that. For now though, I'm just going to set it off to the side. So now we're getting closer. It's looking more like a bowl, but there's not a lot of space in there yet to hold that mushroom soup, and for me, I like as much soup as possible in this bread bowl. So what you're going to do is just take your fingers, and now is the time to really start squashing this bread. I'm just going to give it a little pinch all the way around the edges to help the bread to kind of compress up against the side of the crust. And what this is going to do is it's actually going to create a very thick, dense crust, and that's going to keep it from falling apart when you pour the soup into it. Once you've gone around the edges a few times, just go in with like the flat part of your fingers and give it a little press along the bottom as well. And now you've got a really nicely hollowed out bread bowl, just like that. And this is going to keep just fine until we are ready to pour the soup into it. One thing I tried to do, and I warn you about this, is I thought, well, why not turn this into garlic bread? So I oiled the inside, I baked it, it came out so beautiful. But what happened is because it was really dried out, it absorbed all of the soup and it basically became this very messy mushroom soup bread sponge. So save yourself the agony that I went through. Do not try to toast this. This is the one time that raw bread is actually a better thing because the moisture that's naturally in the bread is going to keep it from completely absorbing all of your soup. So now that this is ready, I'm just going to get it off to the side, and it's going to wait until we're ready to plate. So the next thing I want to do is work on this thyme. I've got a little bowl here. And what you do to get thyme off, oop, got a little piece of bread stuck to my finger. No, it's butter. That's what that cloth is for. There we go. Now I'm clean and can handle the thyme. So thyme and mushrooms are just a match made in heaven. I like to use fresh thyme for this soup wherever possible. What we're going to be looking for is about a tablespoon of thyme leaves. And to get them off, it's actually really easy. You don't even have to chop anything. If you hold your thyme right side up, you're just going to run your fingers along it backwards and all of the leaves will strip off. And you can get that into a bowl. The very top of the thyme is actually much more delicate, so you can kind of just break it off and that's fine. This part though is very woody. Get rid of it. Oh, I've got more here. So I'm just going to keep stripping these leaves backwards. Oh, see that little tip just came right off. If it snaps off, that's actually a good sign. That's how you know it's delicate enough to eat. The part that you do not want to eat will not break very easily. So we're just going to keep stripping that until I get about a tablespoon of fresh thyme leaves. Now, if you can't get your hands on fresh thyme, you can absolutely use dried thyme, but it's a very, very potent flavor. I would use about a teaspoon at most. Honestly, if you're using dried thyme, start with a half a teaspoon, taste your soup. You can always add more, but you cannot take it back out again. Thyme is delicious, but if you put too much in, it will start to taste a little bit soapy actually, just because it's such a fragrant floral flavor. I don't have any words to describe what thyme tastes like either. It's just a beautiful, flowery, delicate herb. Somewhere on the flavor profiles of rosemary, there's a little bit of a woodiness to it, which is quite nice. I think I'm going to do maybe one more, maybe two more sprigs of thyme. I do like to have a little extra because it looks really pretty on top of your soup as a garnish, but it's entirely unnecessary. It does not change the flavor of your soup if you put it on top. So if you don't have a lot of time to work with, don't worry about it. Maybe one more. We'll just strip that part back like so. And there, that's about a tablespoon. I can always get more. I've got lots of extra thyme off to the side here. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is slice up some shallots. Now, shallots are one of those things that I was really scared to use them for the longest time. Anytime I saw them in a restaurant, it was usually a very fancy restaurant. Anytime I saw them in a recipe, it was usually a very fancy recipe. The toast is ready. So for the longest time, I was afraid to use it. I assumed it was a very expensive ingredient. I assumed it was a very fancy ingredient. I finally looked into it one day and they're basically just tiny little red onions and they cost about as much as a clove of garlic. So once I knew that, I started buying thyme all the time. Not thyme. Shallots. I started buying shallots all the time. I always have them in my pantry now, right alongside my onions and potatoes. And what's great about shallot is it has an onion flavor, but it's a very, very mild, delicate onion flavor. So sometimes onions will make the dish taste like onions. When you use something like shallot, it gives it almost the memory of what an onion tastes like. You almost don't even know it's there, and that's what makes it such a nice thing. They're also really nice raw for that reason because they're not as pungent as a regular onion is. That said, if you cannot find shallots or if you just do not want to make an extra trip to the store, you can absolutely use regular onion. What we're going to be looking for is about a quarter, half a cup. Let's say half a cup for a big pot of soup. Half a cup of very finely diced either shallot or whatever onion you have on hand today. I've already done a few of them. Because they're so tiny, they can be kind of difficult to peel and slice. But we're going to treat it just like an onion. So like an onion, I'm going to just start by snipping off the top and just getting that into my garbage bowl. I'm also going to get rid of this paring knife because it served its purpose. One less obstacle to cut around. And again, just like an onion, I'm going to flip that cut side down and go right through the center of the root. So now you can see inside, it really is just a teeny tiny red onion. Nothing to be afraid of. And just like a teeny tiny onion, we're going to peel off that papery skin and get it out of the way. This is the part that can take a while because you can't smash it the way you can a garlic clove. So you do have to peel it very carefully. And just like an onion, the papery skin will try to go everywhere. So just keep an eye on it. Don't let that papery skin get into your soup. It will never cook down. Oh, I've got shallot skins just flying everywhere. There we go. I mentioned this was messy work. There we go. Okay, so we've got this shallot nicely halved. The next thing I'm going to do is, again, tiny onions. I'm just going to slice it, try to do it here so you can see it, along the length of the shallot. And I'm going to do some pretty small slices fairly close together. I'll do both of them here actually so that we can just assembly line this. So once again, several pretty close together little slices because we're looking for a very fine dice. Next thing we're going to do is run our knife through along the width of the shallot. And what that's going to do is it's going to fall naturally into little tiny cubes. That little root part, get rid of it. It's a pain, it's a nicked finger waiting to happen, it's just not worth it. Same thing with this other one. I'm just going to run the knife through like so and get that root out of the way. So these I can add to the rest of the pre-sliced shallots that I've done earlier. You saw how long it took me to do that one. I didn't want you to have to watch me do 4 of them. So this is 4 shallots. That works out to somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 cup. Just like garlic though, you can use more, you can use less. You really do season with your heart with these aromatic vegetables. So speaking of garlic, we've got 3 cloves of garlic here, but I'm not mincing all of them. One of them, and I'm just going to try to find my biggest one because it will be the easiest to use, I'm actually going to use to make the garlic bread. So to do that, I'm going to snip off the end. I'm not going to smash it like I normally do. I will have to kind of painstakingly try to peel this garlic. And actually, it's a little easier sometimes if you just run the tip of your knife through one side of it, just to help split that skin open. Ah, there we go. Woo, look how nicely that's coming off. So I'm gonna leave these other 2 off to the side for a minute because the toast is ready. I'll show you how to turn it into garlic bread. So now you can see, because it's such a nice chunky piece of bread, it's kind of got some nice color to it. Some parts are really dark, some parts are a little bit lighter, nice peaks. It creates a lot of interest when you serve it on a plate. To turn this buttered toasted bread into garlic bread, you take your garlic clove and you're just going to rub it on the bread. You will feel like nothing is happening, but what's happening actually is the garlic is releasing a lot of its juices and those juices are going to absorb into the bread. And that's how you get a nice garlic bread. You'll know it's working because boy, can you smell the garlic coming off of this bread. It just smells like a gorgeous, freshly baked garlic bread because it is. The rest of this actually is pretty much served its purpose, but you know what? More garlic in soup is not a bad thing, so we're going to chop it up and use it. This though, I'm going to just put into the toaster oven. I'm not going to turn the oven on anymore, but it will help to keep it warm just because the residual heat of the oven. Okay. You get some of these crumbs out of the way here. It's very crumbly work, isn't it? There we go. Okay, so for this guy, to make it easier to chop, I'm just going to give it a smash. I'm going to snip off that woody end just like if I was mincing any other piece of garlic, and it will wait its turn. So for these, same thing. I'm just going to snip off the woody ends like so. I'm going to give them a smash with the flat end of my knife. Like that, and that is going to help the skin release from the garlic. Leave that off to the side. The other nice thing about doing that smash method is it makes it flat and that makes it so much easier to cut. It's okay also if you get a little bit of breadcrumbs into what you're prepping because like I mentioned earlier, we're actually using bread to thicken the soup, so it's just getting a little extra thickening agent already going in there. It's not a big deal. Okay, so for these garlic cloves that are nicely flattened out, just like we did with the shallots, I'm just going to run my knife through them the long way. And I'm going to do them all at once, just to make the chopping process a little bit faster. Ooh, I got a little piece there that tried to break away. There we go. We'll slice through this part. And we will slice through this third one. That much garlic left over was pretty much just the universe telling me the soup was going to need more garlic, so I take those signs accordingly. Now that we've got our nice little sticks of garlic, I'm gonna line them up and run my knife through the width way, just like we did with that shallot, and that will help to start mincing the garlic. Now I do have a pretty big pile of garlic here and I want to make sure it's pretty finely minced up, so I'm just going to clean off my knife, rake it into a straight line again, and just run my knife through it one more time. Maybe even the other way, just to make sure it's really finely chopped because this is mushroom soup, it's not garlic soup. And this way it will make sure it really melts into that soup and just becomes a very nice background flavor. Okay, so garlic is done. Actually, I'm pretty messy sometimes when I'm prepping, so I'm going to get a bowl, bring back the garlic that I already started to spill, and rake it up into a bowl. And this is just going to set aside, just like the other things we prepped, until we are ready to cook with them. So at this point, we've done shallots, we've done thyme, we've done garlic, we've even made some garlic bread, and at this point, you're probably thinking, what about the mushrooms? It's mushroom soup, right? Right. Okay, I'm gonna just dry off my hands a little bit. Got some garlic juice all over them. Okay, so for me, when I make mushroom soup, I love to just buy pre-sliced mushrooms at the grocery store. It saves me so much time. When you're using mushrooms for mushroom soup, you need a lot of them. Just like when you're making onion soup, you start with a lot of mushrooms and they cook down into about this much that goes into the soup. This is about somewhere between 8 and 10 cups of mushrooms, and I did a mixture of white mushrooms and brown mushrooms. The brown ones are also called cremini mushrooms. Cremini mushrooms are just tiny portobello mushrooms. You can use pretty much any mushrooms that you like though, up to and including portobellos. Sometimes I see them on sale. I'll just bring those home and I will chop those up very nice and small so that they look about like the cremini mushrooms do. The only mushroom I don't recommend for a mushroom soup is shiitake mushrooms. They have a very strong, very intense, pungent flavor, and they tend to overpower the soup. So I would shy away from those, but otherwise, I haven't met a mushroom I didn't like in a mushroom soup. So these guys are just going to sit off to the side. The other thing I scored at my grocery store this week though, and I was so excited to show you, I found some dried mushrooms. These are chanterelles. Also, I sometimes see some porcini mushrooms and even just a wild mushroom mix. Dried mushrooms are great because they're available year-round and they're usually a harder to find kind of mushroom. I very rarely see chanterelle mushrooms fresh, and when I do, they are so expensive. But dried mushrooms can come from anywhere in the world. They're dried out, they're easier to ship, and so they're a lot more cost effective. All you have to do to bring them back to life, so to speak, because right now they do kind of feel a bit like dry leaves or potpourri. So this is about, by the way, about a quarter of a cup, maybe a third of a cup of dried mushrooms. I just bought them in a packet. This is the entire packet. If you happen to get a lot of them though, maybe you found them at a farmer's market, go with about a quarter to a third of a cup of the dried mushrooms. So all we're going to do is pour some boiling water over the top of these mushrooms, just until they're pretty well covered. And the liquid for these mushrooms, it's going to help A, to rehydrate the mushrooms, but B, we're also going to get a little bit of a mushroom stock, and that's going to add extra mushroom flavor to the soup. I can't always find dried mushrooms at my grocery store though. You absolutely do not need to have them. They're an optional ingredient, but I thought, you know what? Now is a perfect time to show you what to do with them if you do see them. So these are going to sit and soak for at least 5 minutes. They can certainly go longer. What we're gonna do is just let them keep soaking while we are sauteing everything for the soup, and I'm gonna show you how to saute things next. All right, it is time to get cooking. So if there is one thing that mushrooms love more than thyme, it's butter. So to a nice hot pot, I am going to be adding about 2 full tablespoons of butter. Let me get that out of the way. We're doing quite a lot of butter for this and no oil at all because the butter brings a really great flavor to the mushrooms. This is going to be the fat that we cook everything in. So mushrooms, about half of the mushroom is actually going to absorb a lot of this butter, and then the rest of it, the fats in the butter, are going to get a really nice brown kind of glaze all over everything that sautés for this soup. So it adds a really beautiful depth of flavor to it that you just can't quite get from oil. If all you have is oil, or if you don't do dairy products in any way, you can absolutely use oil, that's fine. But if you're okay with butter, I highly encourage you to use butter because it really will make a difference to the flavor of this soup. So now that this has melted, I am going to go in with those 4 shallots that we chopped and just get them sauteing. Get that out of the way too. So these, we're not going to be browning them really deeply, we're not caramelizing them, nothing like that, but I do just want to sweat them out a little bit. Basically what we're doing with this early stage of cooking is we're kind of infusing flavor into the butter. And what's going to happen is, as this butter now has all of the really nice flavors that we're going to be putting into it, the mushrooms are then going to absorb the butter like little sponges. So because the butter is flavored, now your mushrooms are flavored, and that's how you just get an extra depth and layer of flavor in your soup. You're not getting this kind of flavor out of a can, let me tell you. So These are already looking really good. They're getting to a stage that is called translucent. And translucent means you can kind of see through them just a little bit. They're not quite brown yet. I've even described it as kind of a clear brown is really what you're looking for. It's just, they get a very soft, almost golden hue to them, like they're sitting in the sunshine, and that's when you know you've reached a really good place with your shallots. So next thing I'm going to add in is the garlic. And the same thing as we did with the shallots, it's just going to saute very lightly to help infuse the oil. So I always like to warn, do not let your garlic burn. Burnt garlic is one of the most bitter things you will ever taste, and it will absolutely ruin any dish. So keep an eye on it. Make sure you're doing this over medium, maybe medium high heat, depending on your burner, but no higher than that, or you will burn these very delicate aromatics that we're putting in this pot. So the garlic doesn't need a terribly long time, and it is going to keep cooking as we are sauteing the mushrooms as well. So you don't have to have everything cooked thoroughly at this point. You just want to give it a head start so that it's really had a chance to get into that butter. And then lastly, whoop, throwing things everywhere, we're going to add in that tablespoon of thyme. And again, I'm going to just give it a good mix. This really does not need to cook, and you can smell the thyme the second it hits the pan. It's just got, I can't even describe the scent of thyme. It's almost woodsy, but not in a pine scent. It's like you're walking through a really dark, nice, very old forest. It's just such a really nice scent. But unlike rosemary, it doesn't overpower anything quite as much. It just lends a really nice background note. So highly encourage you, if you can, use fresh thyme for this soup, because it does make a really nice difference. It's not in your face, it's just in there. Okay, so this is looking very nice. So the next thing that's going in are all of the chopped mushrooms. Right into the pot. Let's see if I can do this without spilling. I did! I usually spill. Okay, so this right now looks like a lot of mushrooms. They have a lot of water in them, and they are going to cook down dramatically as we continue to just saute them. So this next process takes somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. It really just depends on your stove, your pot, your mushrooms that day. I'm going to give them just a pretty good mix around, because I do want to try to pick up the shallots and the garlic and the thyme that was at the bottom of that pot, as well as some of the butter. Because even the mushrooms on top, they're not going to be searing just yet because they're on top, but they're still going to steam, which will still allow them to absorb a lot of those flavors. So what's going to happen is, for about the next 5 to 10 minutes, I'm going to just let these saute. But how do I want to explain this? It's not quite the same thing as caramelizing onions. We're not going to be really taking our time with it. It's a fairly quick process, but there's a delicate balance between not wanting them to burn, but also wanting to get some color to them. So what I would recommend is, don't go too far from your pot for this, but try, once you've given them a good mix like I have here, and now you can kind of see that there's little bits of thyme on the top and little bits of shallot and garlic. I'm just going to give it a stir, maybe every minute, even 2 minutes. If you move it continuously, it's just going to keep steaming, and you'll never get a really nice golden brown color. If you leave it and ignore it completely for 5 to 10 minutes, the solid fat that's in the butter is going to burn. So don't ignore them completely, but don't babysit them completely either. You need to give them a little bit of freedom and a little bit of room to do their thing, but you will definitely be able to smell, and you'll even be able to see when you give it a good stir, and stir it really up from the bottom and over to the top so that everything kind of rotates. That's how you'll start to develop that really nice color. Once these mushrooms have a good golden brown and have shrunk down considerably, it'll be time for the next step. All right, so these mushrooms have cooked way down, and they look exactly like my picture of perfect mushrooms when I think of them in my mind. I wish you could smell how fantastic they smell, because they smell so good. I'm ready to forget about the soup, grab a fork, and just call this dinner. I mean, it is incredible. So they have cooked down very nicely. And for a little while, they went through a bit of like a simmering steaming process where they were kind of cooking in their own juices. But once that evaporated, it has condensed down into a thick, almost roux-like sauce. It looks like I've added flour to this pot, but I actually haven't. That is just the mushrooms and the butter and all of the sugars that are naturally in the shallots and the garlic. So now that they are cooked, I am going to add salt. You may have noticed I did not salt them before I started cooking. And the reason for that is it would have pulled too much water too quickly out of the mushrooms. And they wouldn't have gotten that nice color to them. Now that there's pretty much no water left, it's okay to put salt. So I'm going to go in pretty generously because again, these are little flavor sponges. And I'm going to go with probably about half a teaspoon of salt and about a quarter teaspoon of pepper. And I may add a little bit more to the soup itself, but right now, while these mushrooms are still happy to just continue absorbing anything that I put on top of them, that's a good time to give them a little extra season. But again, I cannot stress enough, do not do that before your mushrooms are done cooking. Otherwise, they're just going to sit and steam, and you even risk the chance of burning the pepper that you're putting into them. Okay, so these are looking very nice now. So for the liquid that goes into this soup, I like to actually use a mixture of milk and stock. I am doing 6 cups of liquid total. So we've got 3 cups of stock and 3 cups of milk. You use whatever stock you want, and you can use any ratios you want. So if you want a milkier soup, use more milk. If you don't like dairy, use all stock. If you're a vegetarian or a vegan, you can even just use a vegetable stock, or even a mushroom stock would make it that much better. So really, this is yours to play with and turn into your own recipe. This is what I like to do. So I'm going to go in with the stock first because I'm just going to use a little bit of it to deglaze the pan, and cranking my heat all the way up now because we're ready to boil. So what I'm going to do by deglazing is just to pick up those little bits of mushroom and thyme, shallot, and garlic that have clung to the bottom of the pot. And that is just going to make sure, A, nothing burns as it's cooking, and B, that all of that really nice flavor gets picked up into the soup because there is some really fantastic caramelization action that's happening there. And we do not want to forget about that. So now that the bottom of my pot looks clean, I can go in with the rest of the stock. And I have done it with just stock before. I like to call that golden mushroom soup because then it seems like it was a very intentional decision. It was actually just because I was out of milk, but you know, whatever. And it's delicious. So do not feel like you have to have the milk, but the milk definitely makes it much richer, much creamier, much heartier. So I would encourage you to try both if you're open to that. So to the stock, I am now going to go in with the milk. And you will see instantly it becomes a nice creamy color, but it's still a very, very thin, watery soup. And that is, stay tuned, where the bread is going to come into play. Just get that other bottle out of the way there. So while this liquid comes up to a boil, I am going to talk finally about these mushrooms that we soaked earlier. So like I've mentioned, these are completely optional. If you can find them, great. If you can't, keep making your mushroom soup anyway. You're not going to miss too much, but they do add a really, really nice extra layer of flavor. So very carefully, because this bowl is quite full, I am going to start by just scooping out these softened mushrooms. And be careful because your water is probably still quite hot in this bowl, so just be careful that you don't burn yourself. You can even just do it in like a large mug with a handle if you have a giant coffee mug. That's another good safe way to do it. So the reason I'm not just dumping all of this in yet, I'm going to show you. What we have left over here is a really beautiful, basically a mushroom stock. It's made a very nice broth. I don't have enough hands here and I've got a mushroom stuck to my finger. There we go. So you may be able to see there's quite a lot of sediment at the bottom of this bowl. You want to be careful not to get that in there because not always, but sometimes it can have a couple of impurities. Mushrooms are a wild thing, they grow. It's just what happens. Be careful not to get that into your soup. So we are going to use this. I'm just going to kind of use my slotted spoon here. I'm going to pour the stock in very gently, just so that all of that sediment stays behind. That part, not so good in the soup. There we go. It's just, you know, often just little sticks and bits of things. So it's, by no means is it something that's going to kill you if it does make it into your soup, but it might not be very pleasant if you get a piece of it. So just to show you again what's left over, that's the kind of stuff, you don't really want that in your soup. Okay, so I'm gonna get that bowl out of the way, and slotted spoon has served its purpose. Okay. So this is already coming up to a nice temperature. I can see a little bit of movement starting to happen, and it's okay for this to come to a boil because it's such a thin base, again, that you don't really have to worry so much about something burning. If you're using straight milk though, keep an eye on it because the bottom of the pot is very hot and your milk can stick to it and start burning very quickly. So gentle heat if you're using pure milk, but if you're using the mixture like I am, you can just have the heat on full crank until it comes to a boil. Okay, so like I mentioned, this is really thin. While it's still thin, I just want to give it a taste and season accordingly. You will have to adjust this based on the kind of stock that you're using. Some stock has lots of sodium and salt added to it. Some stock has none at all. Some stocks are somewhere in between. So this is going to be to your taste. I'm just going to give it a quick little taste. Yeah, that's pretty bland. So I'm going to add a very generous amount of salt to it. I'll be honest, I usually just buy whatever stock is on sale. Sometimes it has salt, sometimes it doesn't. I prefer it to have no salt because it allows me to really control the seasonings, but you know, in the interest of frugality, if one that has salt already added to it is on deep discount that week, I will bring it home and I will just adjust accordingly as I cook. Okay, give that another mix. And also my taste buds said pepper, please pepper. So I'm going to go in with an extra 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. I'm going to be pretty generous with that. And now I'll give it one more taste just to make sure I like where that soup base is at. Oh, that is perfect. I eyeballed that pretty well. All right, one more stir. And then this bread that I saved from the hollowed out bread bowl is finally coming into play. So what I'm going to do with it is I'm going to use this bread to thicken this soup. And to do that, I'm going to start by just breaking it into really tiny pieces and dropping it in. So like I said, if you're not using bread bowls, you can absolutely just break up a couple of slices of white bread. You're looking for anywhere between a 1/2 cup to a full cup of bread, really depending on how thick you want your soup. I like it super thick. I don't care if it's going into a bread bowl. I've already committed to that heavy of a meal, so I just go for broke and put in all of the bread. Totally fine. And this is actually a really cool method of thickening soup. And it is about as old as a method of cooking soup, I think, as there is. I've read about it, I've looked into it. This is kind of a very old peasant secret because flour, very precious back then. You used it to bake your bread, and every bit of flour that you had, you could not spare. But very often, and we've all been there, you have leftover bread and your leftover bread goes stale. So it's very frugal, it's very economical to take that bread, take all of your leftover vegetables from the week, take your leftover meat from the week, put it all together, and that's how you would get a really good, thick, hearty stew that would feed your family for a few more days. So it's kind of interesting the way it works. And just like a roux that's made by toasting the flour so that you get that nice nutty flavor, because the bread is baked, it already kind of has that nice nuttiness to it. I'm so busy talking, I'm not really breaking apart the bread, so I'm gonna try to fast forward through this process just a little bit. So it does lend a very nice, interesting flavor to it. You can certainly make a roux if you like to do it that way. We cover that method in my potato soup recipe. You can certainly just adopt that and add mushrooms to it. You've got yourself a great mushroom soup. But if you've never tried the bread method, I would encourage you to give it a try because it adds a different texture, it adds a different flavor, and this is how I always make my mushroom soup now. I love the way it comes together. Okay. Almost done with this bread. This is actually a pretty painstaking process to break the bread apart, but I don't want it to be too big, otherwise it can get kind of gummy. And we're not quite done yet with this soup. So what I'm going to be doing for this soup is I am going to be pureeing it to make a really nice, smooth, thick soup, and also to break apart the bread that we have thrown in there. I'm going to be using a tool, there we go, wow, just in time, a tool called an immersion blender. So I'm not usually one to say you need a kitchen gadget to make a recipe. I'm not going to say you need this, but if you have one, it is going to make your life so much easier. If you make a lot of soups, I would encourage you to invest in one of these. As far as kitchen gadgets go, electric kitchen gadgets especially, they're quite affordable. Go online, do some digging. You may be surprised by how cheap they really are. If you don't have one, however, I don't want you to make a special trip out to the store just to make this soup to go buy a whole new piece of cooking equipment. You can use a blender. Just know that hot soup in a blender can expand and it can that can actually blow up on you. So you do very small batches, reserve the part you've blended into a separate pot. It's going to dirty a few more dishes, but it's definitely better than having mushroom soup all over your kitchen. Or if you don't have an immersion blender, you don't have a regular countertop blender, you don't need to blend the soup, but instead of using the bread, I would choose to use breadcrumbs. Maybe about a 1/4 cup of breadcrumbs at most, because they're already so fine, you don't have to worry about pureeing them. I might even chop up the mushrooms just a little bit finer because they're going to become a lot smaller as I blend this soup. If you just put in the breadcrumbs and call it done, you're going to have very large chunks of mushrooms. Not necessarily a bad thing, but you might like it a little bit better if your mushrooms were a little bit smaller. So there is your workaround if you don't have that option. Totally fine. Either way, you choose your own adventure. All right, so in with this very noisy blender, I am going to go. Let's see how that looks. That looks really good. So mine actually has a detachable top, which is great for cleaning because I can just chuck it in the dishwasher. The other reason I like it over a countertop blender, this is the only thing I have to clean now. Okay, I'm going to just give this one last stir. And you can see now how nice and thick it's gotten, and the mushrooms are just very, very, very fine. You still get a couple of big pieces of mushroom in there, but you know what? Those are just treasures as you're eating your soup. I always like to get a big piece of mushroom here and there. So once in a while, I'll even reserve some of the mushrooms, blend everything, and then put the big ones back in if I really feel like a chunky soup. So again, you do what you like. This is your chance to play around with it and make it your recipe. I'm just going to let this come up to a boil, but it's done. So once it's boiling, we are ready to plate it up into those awesome bread bowls. All right, so the soup is ready. Let's get it into this bread bowl. It's time to eat. I'm just going to do it over the pot because I do not want to spill a single drop of this gorgeous soup. I'm just going to give it a good mix to pick up any bigger mushrooms that have fallen to the bottom of the pot, and then just start ladling it directly into the bread. Feels a little bit scary if you've never done this before to be putting soup into bread, but as long as you're using an actual bread bowl that was designed for this purpose, it has such a nice thick crust that you actually don't have to worry about it leaking. And like I said, make sure you just leave a lot of extra bread on the inside to kind of give yourself a little bit of just extra room for the soup to absorb without the bread cracking. Okay, and now I'm just going to very carefully move it onto the plate. Move, garlic bread. You are delicious, but you are not the star of this show tonight. There we go. So we've got that beautiful, nice, hearty soup inside this good, crusty bread bowl. And just to make it fancy, let's take a little sprig of thyme. See if I can snap it off here. There we go. And just garnish it right across the top. So there we have a very simple enough for a weeknight kind of soup. Laid back enough though that you can make it on your day off as well. And this makes so much soup, you can either feed a crowd or even just keep feeding yourself all week long. And this is my rich, hearty mushroom soup. I hope you enjoy it. As always, this recipe can be found in the description below. Please like and subscribe for more videos. I'm Jessica. Thanks for watching.